The evening was calm but full of quiet energy. Inside one of the city's most elegant restaurants, the lights were soft, and the air carried the scent of fresh flowers mixed with fine food. A live pianist sat near the center, playing soft melodies that made the place feel even more refined. Guests in designer clothes spoke in low, polite tones, their laughter blending gently with the music. Every table seemed to sparkle with glass and silver. Among the people moving gracefully between tables was a young waitress. She wore a simple uniform, her hair tied neatly back, her face calm but focused. She wasn't loud or overly cheerful like some of her coworkers. Instead, she had a quiet kind of grace, the kind that didn't need attention. She worked carefully, her hands steady, her eyes always aware of every small detail. She moved as if she had done this for years, even though she was still quite young. To most guests, she was invisible. They saw only a server, someone who brought food, cleared plates, and smiled politely. But there was something in her eyes that hinted she carried a story, one that no one there could guess. That night, a group of wealthy men entered the restaurant. Their laughter filled the room before they even sat down. The waiters and waitresses exchanged glances, already knowing what kind of evening it would be. These men were regulars, rich, loud, and used to getting what they wanted. They talked about money, cars, and deals that sounded more like games than work. When they sat, the young waitress approached their table. She greeted them politely, holding her notepad close. The richest among them, a man with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than most people earned in months, looked at her with a smirk. He noticed how she avoided eye contact, speaking softly and respectfully. He mistook her quietness for weakness. He liked to test people, to feel powerful by making others uncomfortable. He leaned back in his chair and said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "You look too serious to be serving food. Do you ever smile?" The waitress gave a small smile and nodded. "Of course, sir," she said gently. "Would you like to hear tonight's specials?" But he wasn't really interested in food. He was interested in attention. His friends chuckled as he waved his hand. "Go ahead, surprise us," he said, pretending to sound amused. She read out the specials in a clear, calm voice, taking their orders patiently, even when they interrupted her with small jokes. She didn't react or show irritation. She simply did her job with quiet dignity. When she left to place the order, one of the men leaned toward the rich man and said, "You always find a way to mess with the staff. Don't you ever get bored?" The rich man laughed and said, "Not when they make it this easy." As the evening went on, the pianist played slow, emotional pieces. The soft notes filled the air, giving the room a peaceful rhythm. Some guests stopped talking just to listen. Even the waitstaff seemed to move a little slower when the music played. It was that kind of magic, gentle, calming, full of feeling. But for the group of wealthy men, the music became background noise. They were too busy telling stories and showing off to each other. One of them said something about how easy it was to buy talent. "Everything has a price," he said, tapping his glass. "Even art. You just need to find the right number." The rich man looked toward the piano where the musician was finishing a beautiful song. He smiled slightly, then turned to see the waitress walking past their table again. An idea came to him, an idea that would let him show off his power once more. When the pianist took a short break and walked away from the stage, the rich man called out, "Hey, miss!" The waitress stopped and turned toward him. "Yes, sir," she said softly. He gestured toward the piano. "Do you know how to play that thing?" he asked, his voice loud enough for several people to hear. The room went a little quieter. A few people looked over, curious. The waitress froze for a second, unsure why he would ask something like that. "A little," she said carefully, "but it's been a long time." Her honest answer only made him grin wider. "Really?" he said. "A waitress who plays the piano? That's something new." His friends chuckled, sensing where this was going. He leaned forward and continued, "Why don't you show us? Come on, play something for us. Let's see if you still remember how." The waitress looked down, her hands gripping her notepad. She didn't want to cause a scene. "I can't, sir," she said politely. "It wouldn't be right while I'm working." He raised an eyebrow. "Come on," he insisted, "just one song. You'll even get a good tip if you manage a tune or two." The tone of his voice wasn't kind, it was teasing, mocking. The other guests began whispering. Some looked uncomfortable, others just curious to see what would happen. The waitress's face turned slightly pink. She didn't like being the center of attention, especially like this, but she didn't want to be disrespectful either. She took a small breath and said, "I'm sorry, sir. Maybe another time." Then she quietly walked away, leaving their table behind. The rich man laughed loudly, shaking his head. "She's too scared," he said to his friends. "I'll talk." His friends laughed with him, but not all of them seemed amused. One of them muttered, "You're going too far." The pianist soon returned, sitting at the grand piano again. But the moment from earlier still hung in the air. Some guests were still thinking about it. The way the waitress's calm voice had refused without anger. The way the man had laughed as if she were beneath him. At the back of the restaurant, the waitress stood near the counter, pretending to check receipts, but her hands trembled slightly. She wasn't angry, but something inside her hurt. The piano had once been her dream, her world. Years ago, before life had changed, she had played in small halls, at schools, and at home with her family. The piano had been her voice when she had no words. But when her father fell ill and she had to work, music became something distant, a memory she didn't have time to visit anymore. Now here she was, working in a restaurant where people treated her like she was invisible, and a stranger had turned her dream into a joke. Still, she tried not to think about it. She reminded herself that she needed this job. The bills wouldn't pay themselves. The world didn't stop for hurt feelings. When she brought their food later, the rich man smiled again, pretending to be friendly. "You really won't play, huh? Not even one little song?" She just shook her head politely. "No, sir." "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "Your loss," he said, laughing as he turned back to his friends. As she walked away again, one of the older guests at a nearby table caught her attention. He had been watching quietly, his face kind. When she passed him, he said softly, "Don't let them bother you. Some people only know how to talk loud because they've never listened to real music." She gave him a grateful smile and nodded before going back to work. The night continued, the piano music filling the space once more. But now every time she passed by that instrument, her eyes lingered just a little longer. Something deep inside her was stirring again, something she thought she had buried long ago. She finished her shift in silence, clearing tables and thanking guests with her usual calmness. But her mind wasn't calm anymore. She couldn't stop thinking about the sound of the keys, the feel of them beneath her fingers, and the memory of how free she used to feel when she played. In another life, maybe she could have been the one on that stage. Maybe the man who mocked her would have been the one listening. But life didn't work that way, at least not yet. That night, as she left the restaurant, the sound of the piano followed her into the cool night air. The stars above the city shimmered faintly, and she whispered to herself, maybe one day. She didn't know it yet, but that day was closer than she thought. The next evening, the restaurant was just as busy, but the mood felt slightly different. The air was filled with soft chatter and the warm scent of food, but somewhere behind all that, there was a quiet tension. Some of the staff still remembered what had happened the night before. The rich man had embarrassed the young waitress in front of everyone, laughing at her when she refused to play the piano. She arrived for her shift early that day. Her hair was tied neatly as always, her uniform pressed and clean. On the outside she looked calm, but inside her thoughts were heavy. She had barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the rich man's mocking smile and heard his laugh echoing in her mind. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that people like him didn't matter. But the memory stayed, like a small stone in her heart that refused to move. When she started setting tables, one of her co-workers leaned over and whispered, "I heard he's coming again tonight." "The same man." She paused for a moment, her hands tightening around a folded napkin. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. Her co-worker nodded. "He made a reservation this morning. Same table." For a second, she thought about asking to work in another section, but she didn't. Running away wouldn't solve anything. She took a deep breath and continued her work. She had faced harder things in life. She could handle a man with too much money and too little kindness. By the time the doors opened for dinner, the restaurant looked perfect. The chandeliers glowed, the silverware gleamed, and the pianist was already seated, playing a gentle tune that made the whole place feel calm again. Then, just as expected, the rich man walked in with his group of friends. He was laughing loudly, as if the whole restaurant belonged to him. The staff greeted him politely, and he returned their greetings with fake warmth. His eyes quickly scanned the room until they found her. He smiled, one of those smiles that wasn't friendly at all. "Well, look who's here," he said when she approached their table. "Back to work already? I was hoping you'd take piano lessons after last night." His friends chuckled, but it was clear some of them were uncomfortable. One even tried to change the subject, asking about the wine list. But the rich man wasn't done. He liked the sound of his own voice too much. The waitress kept her composure. "What would you like to order tonight, sir?" she asked softly. He leaned back in his chair, pretending to think. He said, tapping his chin. "How about you tell us the specials again, but this time with a smile? You looked nervous last night." She forced a polite smile and repeated the specials. She did it calmly, without missing a word, without showing any hint of irritation. It only made him more restless. He wanted her to break, to stumble, to give him another reason to feel superior. As she walked away after taking the order, one of the men at his table muttered, "You should let it go. She's just doing her job." The rich man waved him off. "Relax, it's just fun. She probably needs a little excitement in her life." The evening continued. The pianist played beautifully, his music floating through the air like a soft river. The guests clapped politely after each song, and the waitress moved between tables, graceful and quiet as always. But the rich man was watching her again, his mind turning. When the pianist paused for a short break, leaving his seat to speak with someone near the bar, the rich man smirked. He turned to his friends. "You know," he said, "last night I gave her a chance to impress everyone, but she was too shy. Maybe we should give her one more chance. What do you say?" A few of them tried to laugh it off, but one said, "Come on, let it go." She clearly didn't want to play. The rich man ignored him. "Oh, come on. It's harmless," he called out loudly. "Hey, miss, over here!" The waitress turned from another table, her hands holding a tray of glasses. She set it down carefully and walked toward him. "Yes, sir?" He pointed toward the grand piano that sat gleaming under the chandelier. "You remember last night? You said you knew how to play a little. The piano's free now. Go ahead, give us a song." Her face remained calm, but inside she felt her heart pounding. "Sir, I'm working," she said softly. "It wouldn't be appropriate," he chuckled. "It's fine. We'll allow it. Think of it as entertainment for the guests." A few nearby diners had already turned their heads, curious about the exchange. Some of them recognized her from the night before. The pianist looked over too, unsure what was happening. The waitress looked around and saw that everyone's eyes were on her again. She didn't like attention. It made her feel exposed. "Please, sir," she said gently, "I really can't." He grinned wider. "Come on now. Don't be shy. I'll make it worth your while." He pulled a thick roll of cash from his pocket and placed a few bills on the table. "Here, play one song. That's more than you'll make in a week." The sound of the money hitting the table made the whole room go still. It wasn't just disrespect, it was humiliation dressed as generosity. The pianist frowned. The manager at the far counter looked uneasy but didn't move, unsure how to handle the situation. The waitress's eyes flicked to the money, then back to him. "No, thank you," she said quietly. "I don't play for money." That answer surprised everyone. It wasn't angry or defensive, it was calm, steady, almost peaceful. But the rich man didn't understand dignity. He thought silence meant surrender. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, then what do you play for?" "Pride." She didn't respond. She turned away, her heart pounding, but before she could step back, he said loudly, "I guess some people just talk big. That's fine. Not everyone has real talent." A few people in the room gasped softly. The pianist stood up from where he had been resting and said, "Sir, please, this isn't the time or place." But the rich man waved him off again. "It's just a little fun," he said. "If she doesn't want to play, that's her choice." The waitress took a small breath, trying to steady her hands. She wanted to stay calm, to stay professional. She had worked hard to build her self-control. But deep inside, something had been stirred, a small spark that had been asleep for too long. That piano wasn't just an instrument to her. It was part of her life, part of her heart. She could still remember the old days when her mother would hum beside her as she practiced, when music filled their tiny home, when dreams still felt possible, but life had changed. Reality had taken the space where dreams used to live. And now here she was, standing in front of a man who wanted to use that old dream to humiliate her. Her mind was torn. Part of her wanted to walk away and let him think whatever he wanted. The other part wanted to sit down and play until he understood what real music sounded like. Music that didn't come from ego or money, but from the heart. For a moment, she looked at the piano again. The soft light glowed across its polished surface. It almost seemed to call her, reminding her who she was before life became about surviving. Then she looked back at him, still smirking, his friends watching, the room waiting. "Maybe later," she said quietly. "When the time is right." He laughed again, leaning back. Sure. Whenever you're ready." She turned and walked away, her face calm, but her heart was no longer quiet. She felt a strange strength building inside her. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't let his arrogance define her story. When her shift ended that night, she stayed a little longer, cleaning tables after everyone left. The restaurant was silent now. The chairs were empty, and only the faint echo of the piano's last song lingered in the air. She walked slowly toward the grand piano and touched the edge of it gently, like it was something sacred. Her fingers hovered above the keys but didn't press them. She whispered to herself, "Not yet." But soon, she smiled faintly, just enough to feel the corners of her lips move, and then she turned off the last light before leaving. The night outside was cool, the streets quiet except for the soft hum of cars far away. As she walked home, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next time that man laughed at her, it wouldn't end the same way. The following evening began like any other, but something inside her had changed. When she woke up that morning, her mind wasn't filled with the usual worries about bills or long hours. Instead, she kept hearing one thing, the echo of that man's laugh and the sound of the piano waiting for her. It wasn't anger that filled her anymore. It was something stronger, something steady. She got ready for work quietly, tying her hair the same way she always did, putting on the same simple uniform. But when she looked in the mirror, she noticed her eyes looked different. They weren't tired anymore. They carried purpose. The day passed slowly until it was time for her shift. The restaurant was busy again that night, even busier than usual. The soft glow of the chandeliers made everything look golden. The air was full of voices, laughter, and the faint sound of silverware touching plates. The piano music flowed beautifully from the corner of the room. Each note seemed to drift through the air like a whisper, calming everyone who entered. When she stepped inside, she noticed right away that he was there again. The same rich man, the same table, the same group of friends. They were laughing loudly, enjoying their wine just like every night before. But this time when he saw her, his smile wasn't playful, it was smug. He hadn't forgotten their last conversation. He had probably been waiting to continue where he left off. She took a small breath and reminded herself to stay calm. She couldn't avoid him forever. Life didn't work that way. Sometimes the things you run from are the very things that bring out your strength. She walked toward their table with the same professional calmness she always had. "Good evening," she said softly. "Would you like to start with something to drink?" He looked up at her, grinning. It's you again. Still no piano lessons?" A few people at nearby tables turned to look. The waitress smiled politely, pretending not to be bothered. "Not yet, sir," she said. "What would you like to order?" He leaned back, pretending to think. "I'll order if you play a song for us," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the music. The pianist on the stage faltered for a moment but quickly continued playing. The waitress stayed still for a few seconds. The other waiters glanced at her, unsure what she would do. The air grew tense like the quiet before a storm. She wanted to walk away again. That would have been the easy thing to do. But deep inside, another voice whispered, "Enough is enough." This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't about pride or proving anything. It was about remembering who she was before life got hard. She turned her head toward the piano. It looked beautiful under the golden light, almost waiting for her. Her fingers tingled as if they already remembered the keys. When she turned back, her voice was calm, almost steady. "If that's what you want, sir," she said, "then I'll play." The man froze for a second, surprised. His friends exchanged glances. He had expected her to refuse again, maybe even get upset, but not this. "You'll play?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded. "Yes, just one song." The entire restaurant went quiet. Even the pianist stopped mid-note, his hands resting on the keys. People whispered softly, wondering what was about to happen. The manager at the counter looked uneasy but didn't stop her. The waitress placed her order pad on a nearby table and slowly walked toward the piano. Each step echoed in the silence. The guests turned their heads to watch. Some smiled in encouragement. Others just looked curious. When she reached the piano, she ran her fingers lightly across the smooth surface. It felt cool under her touch. For a moment, she hesitated. It had been years since she'd played in front of anyone. What if she had forgotten? What if her hands didn't remember the way they used to move? But then she closed her eyes and remembered the small apartment where she used to play as a child. The old upright piano her parents bought secondhand. The way her mother would hum along. The way her father would clap softly after each song. Those memories filled her chest with warmth. When she sat down, the bench creaked slightly under her weight. The sound felt strangely comforting, familiar. She took one slow breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. At first it was quiet, a few soft notes, gentle and unsure. But then, as her hands remembered, the music began to flow like water. It wasn't a famous piece or something practiced for performance. It was something from her heart, something she used to play when she needed peace. The melody was tender and full of emotion. Each note carried a story of struggle, of hope, of quiet strength. The rich man's smile faded almost immediately. His friends stopped talking. The waiters stood still, their eyes fixed on her. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. The entire restaurant seemed to breathe with her music. The sound rose and fell like waves, each note painting pictures in the air. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the melody carry them somewhere far away. Others simply stared, unable to look away. The rich man shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked small, just another person in a room full of people touched by something pure. The song grew stronger. Her fingers moved faster now, confident and alive. It was as if all the pain, all the silence, all the humiliation she had swallowed over the years poured out through the piano. Every note was her voice finally speaking again. When she reached the final part, the music slowed, softening into something fragile and beautiful. The last note hung in the air for a long, trembling second before fading into silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the whole room had forgotten how to breathe. Then slowly one person began to clap. Another followed. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Some stood to their feet, clapping louder, their faces filled with amazement. The waitress sat there for a moment, her hands still resting on the keys, her eyes glistening but calm. She had done it, not to prove him wrong, but to remind herself who she was. When she stood up, she didn't look toward the rich man. She didn't need to. His face said everything. His expression was a mix of shock and shame. For the first time, he had no words. As she walked back toward the kitchen, the pianist approached her quietly. He looked at her with admiration. "That was incredible," he whispered. "You play from the heart. You should be on that stage, not me." She smiled faintly, her voice soft. "Thank you. But I'm happy where I am." He nodded, still amazed, and went back to his place. When she passed the rich man's table again, he looked up at her, trying to find something to say. But the words never came. She simply gave a small, polite smile and said, "Would you like to order now, sir?" His voice was quiet when he answered, almost unsure. "Yes. Yes, of course." The rest of the night continued peacefully. People still whispered about her performance, telling each other how unbelievable it was that a waitress could play like that. Some even stayed longer just to talk about it, replaying the moment in their minds. When the restaurant finally emptied and the lights dimmed, she stayed back again to clean the tables. The air was calm now, filled with the faint scent of flowers and the echo of applause that still seemed to linger. She walked over to the piano one last time and touched it gently. This time she didn't feel fear or sadness. She felt whole. She realized that no one, not even someone with all the money in the world, could take away what truly belonged to her. Outside, the night was cool and still. She stepped out into the quiet street, her heart light. Somewhere inside, she knew that everything had changed. The world might still see her as a waitress, but she had rediscovered something far greater: her voice, her pride, and her strength. And though she didn't know it yet, that one song would become the beginning of something she never expected. The following night came with the same golden light spilling through the tall restaurant windows, but something about the air felt different. It carried a quiet buzz like the calm before something meaningful was about to happen. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. The story of the waitress who played the piano had traveled through the city like a soft whisper carried by wind. Some people came that night not just for dinner, but to see if it was true. Could a simple waitress really play with such grace that she silenced an entire room? Inside, the tables filled quickly. The candles flickered on every table, reflecting softly off the glassware. The piano sat in its usual place, shining under the light. The young waitress moved between the tables, her face calm as always. But her heart felt different tonight. She didn't expect the kind of attention she had received after that one song. She hadn't played to impress anyone. She just played because something inside her told her it was time. But now people were watching her differently. They smiled when she walked by. Some even whispered kind words telling her how beautiful her music had been. For a moment, she worried that she might never feel that same peace again, that maybe the magic of that night was something that couldn't be repeated. But when she looked at the piano, she felt the same familiar warmth. It wasn't about perfection or performance. It was about truth. Music had always been her truth. As the evening went on, she noticed him again. The rich man. He came later than usual, quieter this time. His suit was still perfect, his posture still proud, but his face didn't wear the same arrogant grin as before. He sat down slowly, and for once his voice wasn't the loudest in the room. When their eyes met briefly, there was no challenge in his gaze, only something that looked like regret, or maybe curiosity. She greeted him politely, her voice as calm as always, and he simply nodded. No rude comments, no laughter, no mocking. His friends seemed different too. They didn't tease him or make loud jokes. They talked in lower tones, glancing around as if they knew they had witnessed something that humbled them all. As the night grew deeper, the pianist played his usual set of songs. The melodies floated gently through the air, painting a peaceful mood across the restaurant. But after his final piece, something unexpected happened. He stood up, looked toward the waitress, and gave a small, knowing smile. "Would you like to play tonight?" he asked softly, his voice carrying across the quiet room. All eyes turned toward her. She froze for a moment, unsure. She hadn't planned to play again. It had been a one-time moment of courage, something born from emotion and circumstance. But now people were waiting, not out of mockery but out of genuine respect. Her manager gave a small nod from behind the counter. "If you'd like to," he said gently. No pressure. The restaurant went completely silent. She looked around the room and saw kind faces. Faces that weren't laughing or judging this time, just waiting. Then she looked toward the piano. Its black surface reflected the soft candlelight, and something in her heart told her it was time again. She took a slow breath and walked toward it. Her steps were steady, calm. Each sound of her shoes against the floor seemed to echo louder than anything else. The pianist moved aside respectfully, offering her the bench. She nodded a quiet thank you and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment. Her heart beat slowly, evenly, like a soft drum in her chest. Around her, the world seemed to fade. The chatter, the lights, the weight of the past few days all disappeared. She pressed the first note. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it carried through the room in a way that made everyone lean forward. The sound was full of life and emotion, like the piano itself was breathing. Then came the next note, and the next, and soon the melody unfolded, gentle but powerful. It was different from the songs she played before. This one was slower, more tender. It carried the feeling of forgiveness, of moving forward. Her hands moved gracefully, every touch filled with emotion. The people in the room sat completely still. The waiters had stopped walking. Even the kitchen door stayed shut, as if the whole restaurant was holding its breath. The rich man sat there, unable to look away. For the first time in a long while, he felt small in a way that didn't hurt. It was humbling. He realized that all the money, all the status, all the things he thought made him powerful meant nothing, compared to the quiet strength of this woman playing from her heart. Her music rose and fell like waves. There were moments so soft you could almost hear her breathing, and others that swelled with emotion so strong it made people's eyes glisten. At one table, an older couple held hands, moved by memories the melody seemed to awaken. At another, a young man recording on his phone slowly lowered it, realizing that no recording could capture what they were feeling right now. She closed her eyes as she played, her face calm and full of light. Every note she touched seemed to speak directly to the soul. It wasn't about technique or showing off. It was about truth, about telling her story without words. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, she was no longer aware of anyone watching. She wasn't even aware of herself. She was somewhere deep inside the music in a world where nothing else mattered. No pain, no pride, no humiliation. Just sound and feeling. The rich man felt his throat tighten. He couldn't explain why, but something inside him cracked open. He remembered being young once before money and pride changed him. He remembered what it felt like to dream. He looked down, realizing how wrong he had been. The melody softened again, turning almost fragile, like a farewell. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached the final notes, but they never lost their strength. Each tone faded beautifully into silence, leaving the air warm and full of emotion. When the last sound disappeared, no one moved. There was only quiet, pure, heavy, beautiful silence. It felt sacred. Then came the sound of one pair of hands clapping. It was slow, hesitant. Then another joined. And another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Some guests even stood, their faces glowing with admiration. The sound filled the space like a wave of warmth. The waitress lowered her head slightly, humble and calm. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, and she didn't seek it. She stood up slowly, giving a small smile of gratitude, and stepped away from the piano. As she walked back to the service area, people smiled at her, some even calling out kind words, simple things like beautiful and thank you. Each word touched her deeply, but she didn't linger on them. She was happy enough knowing she had shared something real. The pianist approached her again and spoke softly. "You should be the one playing here full time," he said with a gentle smile. She shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I'm just grateful I can still play." Behind her, the rich man stood up from his chair. The applause had died down, and the guests were returning to their conversations, but he couldn't move on so easily. He walked slowly toward her. For the first time, his voice was low and uncertain. "That was incredible," he said. "I don't think I've ever heard anything like it." She looked at him, calm but kind. "Thank you, sir," she said. He hesitated, his expression softening. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For the way I acted before. I was wrong." She didn't say much, only nodded gently. "Sometimes we all forget to listen," she replied. "Music has a way of reminding us." He stood there for a moment, unsure what to say next. Then he nodded almost to himself and returned to his table silently. The night ended quietly. The guests slowly left, still talking about the music. The waitress stayed to clean up again, her hands moving gracefully across the tables. When she passed by the piano one last time, she stopped and touched it softly. This time there was no fear, no hesitation, only peace. She realized that sometimes life has a strange way of bringing people full circle. What had started as humiliation had turned into healing, not just for her, but for everyone who listened. Outside, the night air was cool and gentle. She stepped into the darkness, her heart light, her spirit calm. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. Because now, she knew who she was, and nothing could take that away. The following morning began quietly. Sunlight slipped through the blinds of the small apartment, touching the worn-out wooden floor and the simple table where a few old music sheets were stacked neatly. The waitress sat beside them, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea. She hadn't slept much, but she didn't feel tired. Her heart was full in a way she couldn't quite explain. The sound of applause from the night before still echoed softly in her memory. It wasn't about fame or attention. It was the feeling of being seen, truly seen for who she was. For years she had worked quietly, never showing anyone what she could do, never believing anyone would care. But now something had changed. When she arrived at the restaurant later that day, there was a different kind of energy in the air. The usual morning calm was replaced by quiet excitement. The other staff smiled when they saw her, offering small nods of respect that hadn't been there before. One of the waiters whispered, "Everyone's been talking about you since last night. People are calling, asking who the pianist was." She gave a small, shy smile. "I was just filling in," she said softly, but she could feel that things were shifting. Even the manager, who was usually stern and serious, called her into the office. He wasn't the kind of man who smiled often, but today there was warmth in his eyes. "You did something special last night," he said. "We've had customers calling nonstop. They want to come again just to hear you play." She looked down, unsure how to respond. "I never meant to draw attention, I just wanted to play." "And that's exactly why it worked," the manager said. "You played from the heart. People can feel that." She nodded quietly. Deep inside, she wasn't sure what to do next. Music had always been her private world, something she turned to when life felt too heavy. Sharing it so openly felt strange, almost vulnerable. But that night had changed not only her, but others too, especially the rich man. He hadn't returned to the restaurant since the performance. His friends said he had gone quiet afterward, canceling meetings and dinners. No one really knew what was going through his mind, but something about that song had shaken him. He kept hearing it in his head, the gentle rhythm, the rise and fall of each note, the honesty in her touch. It had reminded him of something long forgotten. When he was young, before he became wealthy, he used to love music. His mother had played the piano in their small home. Sometimes he would sit beside her as she played lullabies that made the whole world feel still. He had lost that part of himself somewhere along the way, buried it under success, pride, and the noise of business dinners and shallow compliments. But now that melody had awakened something deep inside him. For days he found himself restless. He looked around at the expensive paintings on his walls, the designer furniture, the wide glass windows overlooking the city, and for the first time, none of it gave him peace. The silence in his house felt heavier than ever. One afternoon, he walked into his study and opened the old piano that had been sitting untouched for years. The keys were slightly dusty, the surface cold. He placed his fingers on them, trying to remember how it felt to play. The sound was awkward, uneven. But as he pressed a few more notes, something stirred within him. He played slowly, clumsily, yet the act of playing brought a strange comfort. He wasn't chasing perfection, he just wanted to feel again. Back at the restaurant, life carried on, but the atmosphere had changed. More guests arrived each night, curious to see the waitress who played the piano. She didn't play every evening, but when she did, the room filled completely. The moment her hands touched the keys, the world outside disappeared for everyone listening. Sometimes she'd notice people wiping tears quietly, others smiling softly as if remembering something beautiful. Her music didn't come from technique, it came from truth. And that truth reached people in ways words never could. One evening, as she was setting tables before dinner, she looked up and saw him standing by the entrance. The same man who had once mocked her now looked uncertain, almost humble. He waited for her to notice him before approaching. "May I talk to you?" he asked quietly. She nodded, leading him toward a quieter corner of the restaurant. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said softly. "I didn't expect to come back," he replied. "But I had to." He paused, searching for words. "That night, when you played, it changed something for me. I don't think I've ever felt something so real before." She listened quietly. His tone was different, no pride, no arrogance. Just honesty. "I realized how empty I've been living," he continued. "Money, success, all of it. I thought those things made me someone. But they never gave me peace. That song, your song, reminded me of who I used to be." He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I've been playing again. Trying to, at least." He gave a small, self-conscious laugh. "Not very well, but it feels good." Her eyes softened. "That's what matters," she said gently. "It's not about playing well. It's about feeling alive again." He smiled faintly. "You have no idea how much those words mean." The two of them stood there in silence for a moment. The clatter of dishes and the soft hum of conversation filled the air, but between them, there was something quiet and unspoken. A connection that came from understanding, not status. That night he stayed for dinner. He didn't sit with his usual group of loud friends. Instead, he sat alone near the back, just listening as she played. Every note seemed to pull him deeper into thought. When she finished, the applause was gentle but heartfelt. She looked up briefly and saw him sitting there, his eyes calm, almost peaceful. He nodded at her, a silent thank you, and she nodded back. After that evening, he began visiting the restaurant often, not as a man trying to impress anyone, but as someone seeking quiet moments. Sometimes he would come early just to sit near the piano while she cleaned or tuned it. They would talk casually about music, about life, about how strange it was that a single night could change everything. Slowly, the walls between them faded. What had begun with humiliation had turned into something softer, respect, perhaps even friendship. He began helping the restaurant in small ways, too. He spoke with the manager about sponsoring a local music night once a week, where unknown musicians could perform. He wanted to give others a chance to be heard, just as the waitress had been. The event became a regular feature, drawing in new guests and giving young artists a platform to share their music. Every time someone played, he sat quietly, listening with the same reverence he had once denied others. The waitress never took credit for any of it, but she knew in her heart that her music had started this ripple. One act of courage, playing that night, had reminded people that kindness and humility mattered more than pride. Weeks passed, and the connection between the two of them deepened. They never spoke about the night of humiliation again. It no longer mattered. What mattered was what had come after, the change, the growth, the quiet understanding that had replaced bitterness. One evening, after closing, they sat near the piano while the restaurant was empty. The soft glow of the lights made everything look warm. He asked, "Do you ever wish you had followed music as a career?" She thought for a moment. "I used to," she admitted. "But maybe it wasn't time. Maybe I needed to live life first to understand what music really means. It's not about being on a stage. It's about touching people," he smiled. "You've done that more than you know." For a long moment, they sat in silence. Then gently she began to play, a simple melody, one she had written herself. He listened, eyes closed, and when she finished, he whispered, "It feels like forgiveness." She smiled softly. Maybe that's what it is. When she looked at him, she realized he wasn't the same man who had walked into that restaurant weeks ago. He had changed, not just in words, but in spirit. The pride was gone, replaced by something quieter and more human. And she too had changed. She no longer felt invisible or small. Her music had given her a voice again. Outside, the night was calm. Through the windows, the city lights shimmered like small stars. Inside, the piano stood silently, its surface still warm from her touch. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments, born from pain, from misunderstanding, can lead to something beautiful. Neither of them knew where life would take them next. But one thing was certain. They would never forget that night, or the lesson it carried, that real strength isn't in wealth or pride, but in the courage to be honest, to be human, and to listen. The weeks slowly turned into months, and life in the restaurant found a new rhythm. The once ordinary place had become a small beacon of music and connection. People didn't just come for the food anymore, they came for the feeling. There was something warm about the place now, something honest and real. The piano sat proudly in the corner, its soft glow from the overhead lights a quiet reminder of how one night had changed everything. The waitress continued her work as usual, humble and steady. She still served tables, cleaned counters, and carried trays with quiet grace. But every few evenings, when the timing felt right, she sat down at the piano and played. Those moments never failed to draw a crowd. The room would grow silent as if the walls themselves were listening. Her music had become more than sound. It had become a kind of peace. For many guests, it was a way to forget their troubles, to breathe again after long days. For her, it was a reminder that beauty could come from anywhere, even from pain or humiliation. The rich man kept visiting, though never in the same way as before. He no longer tried to impress anyone. He came quietly, always sitting in the same corner, content to listen. Sometimes he stayed after closing time, helping the staff move chairs or put things away. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. One night, as the restaurant emptied, he asked her, "Do you ever think about what's next? About doing more with your music?" She smiled faintly. "Sometimes," she said, "but I think music finds its own path. Maybe I'm already doing what I'm meant to do." He nodded, understanding. "Still, people deserve to hear you. What you have, it's not common." She looked at him quietly. "And what you have now," she said softly, "isn't common either. You've changed." He chuckled lightly, but there was emotion in his eyes. "I think you changed me," he admitted. "Or maybe your music did. I can't really tell the difference anymore." That night, as she locked up, she thought about his words. For so long she had lived quietly, hidden behind trays and uniforms. She had believed that her music no longer had a place in the world. But life had a strange way of reminding her that it did, that sometimes even silence could turn into a song again. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A well-known music critic who had been dining at the restaurant during one of her performances wrote an article. It wasn't a headline story, but it was full of admiration. The writer described her as a hidden gem who plays with the soul of someone who's lived many lives. The article spread quietly but steadily. Local magazines picked it up, and soon, people from different parts of the city began visiting just to hear her play. Some even asked if she taught music or if she would perform elsewhere. The manager was thrilled. "You've put this place on the map," he told her one afternoon. "But don't forget to take care of yourself too. You have a gift and the world is finally noticing." She smiled, grateful, but kept her feet firmly on the ground. She wasn't chasing fame. She was content knowing her music was reaching hearts. That was enough. The rich man, too, seemed to find new purpose. He began funding small music scholarships for underprivileged children. "It's never too late to start over," he said when she asked him about it. "If someone hadn't reminded me what music really means, I might still be lost." The waitress admired the change in him. He was no longer the man who needed attention or validation. He had learned to listen, to others, to music, and most importantly, to himself. One evening, he arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. The piano was quiet, the tables still being set. He carried something in his hand, a small worn-out notebook. "I found this while cleaning my old house," he said, handing it to her. "It's my mother's. She used to write songs. I thought, maybe you'd like to see it." She opened the notebook carefully. Inside were handwritten notes, lyrics, and fragments of unfinished melodies. Some were faded, but they carried warmth. "She must have loved music deeply," the waitress said softly. "She did," he replied. "I think she would have loved your playing too." They stood in silence for a while. The sound of soft rain began tapping against the windows, and the air smelled like the beginning of spring. "Would you play one of her songs?" he asked gently. She looked down at the pages and found one that caught her eye. The melody was simple but beautiful. She nodded. "I'll try." As she began to play, the room filled with something tender and pure. It wasn't just notes, it was memory, love and time blending together. The man closed his eyes, listening, as the melody carried him back to a world he thought he had lost. When she finished, neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, she sat alone by the piano. Her reflection shimmered faintly on its polished surface. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the humiliation, the courage, the transformation. Life had taken her through so many turns, but somehow every moment had led to this peace. She realized something important then. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about freeing yourself from it. The man who once mocked her had changed because he was willing to face himself. And she had changed because she allowed her heart to stay open. A few months later, the restaurant organized a special event, a small charity concert for young musicians. The waitress was invited to perform as the closing act. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted to be the center of attention, but when she thought about the children who would benefit, she agreed. That night, the restaurant was filled with people from all walks of life, students, families, workers, and even musicians who had once been inspired by her story. The lights were dim, the air buzzing with quiet excitement. When she walked toward the piano, her hands didn't tremble this time. She wasn't afraid. She knew exactly who she was. The rich man sat among the audience, his expression proud but calm. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes said enough. She began to play. Not the grand, complex piece people might have expected, but something gentle and honest. The melody carried traces of joy, sorrow, hope, and peace. It was her story told through sound. Every note seemed to tell the crowd that no matter how small or forgotten you feel, your voice matters. As the last note faded, the room erupted into applause. People stood, clapping not just for her talent, but for her heart. She stood, bowed lightly, and smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. For the first time, she didn't feel like a waitress who happened to play piano. She felt like herself, complete, free, whole. After the concert, people gathered around to thank her. Some shared their own stories. Others simply wanted to shake her hand. She listened to each of them, grateful and humbled. When the crowd finally thinned, the rich man approached her. "You did it," he said softly. She shook her head. "We did," she replied. "If you hadn't challenged me that night, maybe I never would have played again." He smiled a little sadly. "I wish I'd known then what I know now." "You do now," she said kindly. "And that's what matters." They stood quietly, watching as the staff began cleaning up. The lights dimmed and the soft hum of the city filled the air. Before leaving, he placed his mother's notebook gently on the piano. "Keep it," he said. "It belongs with someone who understands what it means." She looked at him, eyes warm. "Thank you," she whispered. He turned to go, but paused at the door. "You know," he said with a faint smile, "that night I thought I was teaching you a lesson. Turns out you were the one teaching me." She smiled softly. "Life has a funny way of doing that." After he left, she sat down once more and opened the notebook. The pages fluttered softly, and she began to hum one of the melodies written inside. It blended gently with the faint sounds of the city outside, like the world itself was listening. The restaurant lights went out one by one, leaving only the glow from the piano lamp. She played a few last notes, slow, peaceful, like a farewell and a beginning all at once. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets shined under the dim streetlights, quiet and calm. As she locked the door behind her, she took one last look at the piano through the window. It stood there silently, waiting for the next song, the next story. She smiled to herself and walked away into the cool night air. Her heart light, her soul full. For the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly as it should.